Emily Elizabeth, and I'm the host of the What Fulfills You podcast, a show for and about individuals always seeking to be their best selves. On this show, we talk all about building the mindset, finding the right careers, creating meaningful relationships, and so much more. Welcome to the What Fulfills You podcast. Awesome. Well, Adriana, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited. We're picking up from basically Milan, where we met 2 years ago.
Yes.
Sporadically on my solo travels to Paris and Milan.
Yeah, which was very cool, by the way.
Yeah.
It's rare to meet somebody who's so excited and inclined to travel alone because it is so intimidating.
Yeah.
So that was really cool.
Yeah. I remember I was telling you yesterday that I was inspired from that like evening conversation with you and Manu, and just how it was like fun to be around people that are also open-minded, understand the world beyond just New York and the US. Something I'm always encouraging my podcast listeners and my Instagram followers to really think about, because having been born and raised in a small town in Pennsylvania and then lived in a few different cities, I realized that was something that lacked and continues to lack in this culture. Mm-hmm. I guess maybe that's like where I want to start is, how has that been for you? Because I feel like you are one of those people, like even at coffee yesterday, just super easy to talk to. Like we can talk about so many things and just certain things that like you get as well. How have you experienced expanding your mind in that process and like being, because you were born in New York, that's right, yeah. So like you're from here too, but you've also, and you're fluent in Italian, basically.
Yes,
yeah.
now. Took me long enough.
Yeah. But like you've experienced a lot of things. I think you and I can agree, like not everyone within the U.S. has experience and or realizes is a thing, you know? And I think that is like a tier, many tiers up from just like the beginning.
Totally. I think that it's interesting because you really learn so much about yourself when you're out of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And it's so important to travel, mainly because it teaches you about yourself, about how you interact with the new culture, with a new culture, communication skills, humor, food, meeting new people. And so I hope this answers your question, but I think that that's what helped me gauge relationships and conversations and be able to put myself in those, I don't know, moments.
Yeah.
Just because I do have that. I mean, we lived in Milan for 2 years together. Yeah. And it wasn't easy in the beginning.
Really?
Yes, it was a little challenging because you're so used to being in the same city with, you know, your bodega.
So yes,
and
that's so true.
Your things, your people, your places. Yeah. And so to put yourself in a new, very vulnerable position, it's not easy. And how you recover from that and how you adapt is everything.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question.
Were you fluent by the time you were living in Milan in Italian?
So,
I mean, I remember when I heard you speak 2 years ago, I was like, damn, like that's like, well, I mean, like it's awesome. Like, okay, like, yeah, like you can definitely speak some, like when you're married to someone where their native language is Italian, but like, I was like, she's like fluent.
Well, it did help though. My husband and I, when we first started dating, the majority of his friends were, I mean, not the majority, but there were many Italians. Yeah. And so during dinners together, they would all start speaking in English. And I said, please speak in Italian because it's the only way I'm going to learn.
Yes.
And my family is Brazilian. And so I think that helped. So me speaking Portuguese and growing up in Miami, I spoke Spanish.
No way.
Yeah, and so I
didn't know you were like super, trilingual, quadlingual.
Yes.
What do you call that?
But it's easier when you have the base of those Latin languages.
That's very true, yeah.
Which was helpful, but definitely being in Milan was helpful for that. I will say I love the way that Italians act and the way that they interact with you when you're speaking to them in Italian, because even if you're doing okay, they'll encourage you to keep speaking so you can develop your language. They'll correct you super politely. And so it's that made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, I felt that when I was over there too, because when I was by myself, I was definitely trying my hand at speaking in Italian, and they were so warm and just like giggly and bubbly with me because they're like, oh, that's so cute. Like she's like traveling by herself. She's actually doing, you know how to, like, I think that sometimes Americans have this rep when they go abroad to like, especially like places like Paris and, you know, France and Italy and all over. And when they don't even give a try at the native language there, where we're kind of often like always speaking English, and I mean, I've heard people tell me like, oh, like I'm so surprised, like you're an American and you're actually like speaking it and like not too shabby, you know? And I was like, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's true. And I mean, you're very fearless in that sense too, which is really cool because it's intimidating. You're in another country, and you're doing, you know, your best. You're trying to communicate and get around, and so it is really courageous.
Yeah, I want to start with your early 20s and your career path. I know we spoke a little bit yesterday about how you eventually left your corporate life at 23, but what was early 20s like for you? I know you were in fashion and definitely had self-awareness on like your interest in that. Can you dive into how you eventually got into that before you left? Because I think a lot of people struggle with, and would definitely dive into like even where you're at now, but like just figuring out, okay, what's like the next step based on what I'm interested in or what I'm good at.
Of course. So early 20s are always a really interesting time.
Yes.
And I had just moved back to New York from Miami, where I grew up there.
Yeah.
And so I was navigating going to school. One really great aspect of where I went to college, I went to LIM, and it's a business school for fashion.
Oh, wow.
So it's really, really insightful and interesting, and it helps you understand the scope of fashion as a whole. One element of it that I really loved, not at the time, but now that I look back, is that they require you to take a different internship every semester of college.
Wow.
So, and it can't really overlap. So they encourage you to try a new company, no matter how happy you were at your previous one. Try something new, surround yourself with new people. And so that's how I got started in fashion. And I went from PR to sales, which was interesting because they are two completely, I mean, they work in tandem, but they're two completely different elements of the business.
Yeah.
And so I had been doing sales for my last internship of school. And I want to go back for a sec. So I always knew that I wanted to work in fashion.
Okay.
I always knew that it was something I really loved.
Okay.
It was an industry that brought me happiness and curiosity, which I think is really important. I didn't know what I wanted to do within it.
Okay.
And going back to what we said, what we were speaking about even yesterday, there's some people that just know.
Yeah.
They know, and they're good, right? So you meet that one friend that works in PR, and you're like, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is your place in fashion or in your industry. And I really didn't know. And I experienced a few different jobs and different internships. And it took me really until I met my now husband to see somebody that was so confident in the choice that they made, in what they want to work, the industry that they want to work within, to realize that I was still searching for what I wanted. Yeah. And that was okay.
Yeah.
That's so fine. And it doesn't have to happen when you're in your early 20s or your mid 20s. Sometimes it can happen when you're in your 40s and your 50s. Yeah. Even later than that. And then what else?
Just like navigating, like, I guess even after college, like going into your first job and like I guess initially going down like the fashion path as a whole. Like, how did you explore that? And like coming to New York, how did you get into like the door with like certain companies, and how did you kind of navigate, okay, this is something I do enjoy in the fashion industry, this is something I don't enjoy as much?
Okay. So when I first started, actually, I'll tell you this is a funny story. My first internship was at a PR agency. And it was great experience because I was working with the clothing. I mean, it was also very funny because now that I look back, I think my first task ever in fashion was to organize a closet of hangers. And I'm telling you, it really in fashion, it really starts like this. There are very mundane tasks that somebody has to do.
Yeah.
But what that teaches you is that no job is too big, no job is too small.
Right.
And especially going into owning your own business where, as you know, you're really doing everything.
Yeah.
And you're doing intern work at any stage.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it too, because it's important to have that element to yourself. My favorite word actually is humility. And I think that you need to be humble in this industry, in every industry, but especially if you're a business owner.
Yeah.
That's something that I hold very close to heart.
Right.
But to continue, so I started working at this PR office, and from there, I met a lot of editors that were working at various publications within fashion. So my first real interaction was with Vanity Fair.
Wow.
I became friendly with one of the fashion editors there, and that was my next internship.
Wow.
From there, I interned at Chanel in the beauty and fragrance division, and I actually received this through a contact at Vanity Fair. So I think it's just about really, to answer your question, establishing those connections, showing up, doing a great job, because you have to, show up as who you are, and you have to be reliable and the person that, you never know who you're going to meet.
Right. Right.
And so that's how I got into the industry, I will say.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward, you took a leap at the age of 23.
Yes.
You quit your job and you decided to go down the entrepreneurial path.
Yes. And I wish there were warning signs.
Yeah, like I would love for you to like dive into the things that you learned in that process. What was your thought process in leaving? Like what made you feel like this is the right next step?
So that's a great question. I think that I was very young.
Yeah.
Very young. And I knew in my head, I said, it's now or never really, which isn't really true. But in my mind at that moment it was, because I said, I have the opportunity now to try.
Yeah.
To try, and why not? Let me see how it goes. I can always start again, going back to humility. I don't mind starting from ground zero and, not picking up where you left off, because it's difficult. Right. But I said, this is the time. So I told you yesterday, but I resigned at my corporate job. I was working in sales. And I went home, and it was actually a springtime, ironically enough. We're recording in the spring.
Yeah.
I went to the rooftop of my building, and I looked at the abyss, very dramatically. And I thought, either what have I done or what a great choice.
Right.
And that moment of fear and excitement, it's really unique. Yeah. And I think every entrepreneur has that. So I started this next season and next chapter of my life with my now husband again. Yeah. And he's always been an entrepreneur. Yeah. And it was a really interesting observation for me, and to kind of see him in his element and see him he had an office on 68 Green Street. And it was a beautiful loft, and he would go there every day. So I started going there with him every day, and we started working together, which was really cool. Yeah. And he kept his sense of independence and autonomy within his business. And I kind of came in, and we developed this new business together, which was cool. And we did that for a few years before starting our own brand. Right. And it's not as easy as everyone says, because you really, you don't know how much goes into it. Yeah. You don't really understand how things are done, and you have to really be fearless. You have to be okay with making mistakes. Yeah. Curious. Yeah. And kind of be ready for a roller coaster all the time. Because as you know, being an entrepreneur, the highs are really high, but the lows are really low. Yeah. And you have to be okay with that. When you're switching from corporate to working for yourself, you just need to know that your problems are not going to go away. They're just going to change. Yeah. So, and you'll learn how to navigate those. But there's a learning curve for sure.
Okay, now, like years later, do you feel like, even though, because it's interesting, I had a similar mentality when I left my corporate job, and even in the early days of thinking about starting my now marketing agency, I was like, well, it's going to be much easier to pivot if I do this earlier than later, because I think like the more years you have in a corporate job, or the more years you have like down the road where you have investments in certain things, or just more responsibilities, it gets a little bit emotionally harder, I think, to separate, right? So looking back, do you feel like it was a better idea to be able to do that at such a young age?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Even though, yes, like you can still, of course, like do this at any age, but there are perks to jumping early and having that window of, like, I think like when you're younger, less responsibilities, lower cost of living compared to like years later. So like, what are your thoughts now looking back?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That what's the expression? You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. I mean, when you're in your early 20s, more often than not, you will have less financial responsibility. You're finishing school, so maybe you have those student debts to consider, but you most likely aren't married and have children that you need to send to school, and it's a little bit more relaxed, and so you can take that chance then rather than taking it when you have a family. When you have a family, when you have children, when you have a financial obligation that's bigger than you, and you can do it, but it's just definitely, it's going to weigh more. It's going to be more challenging. But I do agree with that.
What are some of the, like, I guess initially, the first couple of years when you were finally like doing this business with your husband, and also, or your now husband at the time, I know boyfriend, but what were some of the learning curves that you feel like really stood out when it comes to not just entrepreneurship, but I think almost like a mix of figuring out your career in your 20s and naturally comes with the territory of like building something for yourself?
So I would say, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. So you're asking the learning curve of through the process of becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah. And then also just like as you're like building, your own clothing brand, and like learning like, oh, like this is, at least at this chapter of life, something like we want to pursue and something we want to go down the path. Because I think a lot of people just struggle to even know, okay, maybe it's entrepreneurship. Maybe they know they're entrepreneurial. Maybe they know that they want to eventually just work for themselves, but they don't really know even in what domain or like what industry, right? So how, like, because I think at that time too, it kind of sounds like you were also figuring it out, as, you know what I mean? Because it's like the early years of entrepreneurship, you're like doing a little bit of everything. So it enables you to kind of see, okay, this is something that I'm good at. This is something that I could also, like, we could build on the side, things like that. How did that process go for you?
Okay. Oh, this is a great question.
Yeah.
So one thing that I really loved about, I mean, working with my boyfriend at the time, but even just working with one other person, it doesn't have to be a partner, is that you're constantly collaborating. You're constantly throwing ideas out there and saying, what if we did this? What if we did this? And you can do it on your own, but it's definitely easier when you have somebody that's done it before. And somebody that knows you and knows your strengths, so you guys can work off each other in that sense. Going back, I think, or I should say looking back, I think it was just trial and error, giving things a try, seeing how it worked, and using what worked to take whatever worked, make it tangible, and implement it into the business. And so that's, I would say, to answer your question, probably more trial and error. And what I did was that I never stopped trying to learn or challenging my curiosity. And that's what led me even to the world of health.
Right.
And so to answer your question, I think that being curious and constantly being a student of your practice, of the world, it sounds silly, but it's true. That's what will keep you curious and will aid your business in whatever you choose to do. Because like I told you yesterday, I didn't know exactly what it is that I wanted to do. I also, in one sense, don't think that you need to limit yourself to one industry.
Right.
I think you can do a little bit of everything, and and it can work out really beautifully. But you have to be curious.
And I feel like that was like a big, like, aligned takeaway that I had from our convo yesterday. I was like, oh, I feel like similarly, both of us were very curious in, just throughout the years of like, oh, I like this and I like this, and I'd be curious to explore this part, And I think just observing through my own girlfriends, a lot of them don't, or just people in general, I think in their 20s, even in the city like New York, sometimes stay very linear in what they're doing because it's just routine at that point, right? Like for you to go from fashion and then also explore health, right? And then now to be able to, you know, build a new business, a new project off of that is amazing. And I think a lot of people don't know how to like keep that part of them as an individual afloat. Like, what did you do? Because I also love, like, by the way, side tangent, I actually picked up the book on Amazon, the book that you were reading yesterday. Yeah, I went and got it because you told me about it, and I was just like, this is so curious, and I love reading. I'm a curious person always. I'm always trying to just like learn and be a student of all things because I think there's just so much. And, you know, for example, I don't have a TV at home. I haven't had a TV in years. And I think for that reason, people always go, what do you do like in your free time? And I'm like, I'm actually always kind of working, but like these things won't appear like work to you. Like I might be like shooting content or something, and I'm like also learning photography. Like I'm learning to do like street photography, you know, like stuff like that, right? Yeah. And I feel like that's similar with you when you're sharing like, you know, that led to your interest in health and like going down that route. Can you share a little bit of that? Because I did want to dive into, you know, like what has led to you to your new project as well.
Yes. So I love that you don't have a TV on. I love that. I thought about this on the way here, and I thought about this after we left each other yesterday. Yeah. The most important relationship you will ever have in your life is with yourself. Ever.
Yes.
You go to sleep with yourself every night. You wake up, you look in the mirror, and it's you.
Yes.
And even if you're in a relationship, or even if you're so happy at your job, if you don't continue your personal growth and personal development as a person, how are you supposed to show up for anything in your life?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's the reason that book that you're talking about, it's Centering in the Art of Intimacy by Gay Hendricks and I believe his wife. So great book. And it reminds you that your relationship with yourself is everything. So back during COVID, we were all at home.
Yes.
Crazy to think that it's 4 years now, by the way.
Yeah, I was about to say the same. I was like, I can't believe it's been 4 years.
Yep, 4 years last month.
Yeah.
Crazy. But it was COVID, and everyone was I think there were two ends of the spectrum. You were either really healthy or you were having margaritas at 11 a.m. Like there was no...
That's actually very true.
There's no in between. And so at the beginning of that... my husband and I, we were, you know, walking around Brooklyn where we live, coming home, cooking, reading, watching the news, you know, doing whatever you could do. And I thought this is a great time for me to peek up on any interest that I have.
Yeah.
So I started reading more about nutrition. My family's been into the health space for a while. I'll say my grandparents on my mom's side, they're in their 90s, and they are the healthiest people.
Wow.
I know. Yes. They're, I mean, incredibly healthy. My grandmother's been practicing Chinese medicine for ages.
Yeah.
And so I got into that. I started studying at the Integrative School of Nutrition, which was really interesting and a very different approach to health than the standard, you know, Westerner practice.
Yep.
And so after that, I realized, and it is quite literally like a light switch turned on in my head. This is what brings me joy. This is what brings me happiness. I need to do something within this field. But I will preface this by saying it's really important to, going back to that relationship with yourself, to really understand what you want to do, because you either want to take this passion and make it a career,
right,
or you want to keep it a passion. It doesn't have to be a career path.
Right.
It can also just be something you love to do.
Yeah.
Because painting for pleasure, maybe that changes for you. Maybe it goes from being therapeutic and you do it for pleasure, then when you're doing it for profit, you know, or to make a living, maybe that relationship with your craft is going to change.
Yes.
And so you really need to learn about yourself. And so I did learn that I really love it, and I loved it enough to make it a part of my life.
Wow.
And with that, I meditated on what to do with that love and with that passion. And it took 3 years from that point for me to realize that I want to make it something that I can share And that's what the project that I'm working on now is.
Yeah. What was that gut feeling like? Because, and I asked you because I've had that myself in like my podcast, especially in a lot of things that I do today. I was just like one of those, this is what lights me up, and I'm going to play with it like craft, like a kid, but also learn how to monetize it in some way. And that's where the business brain comes in. And I feel like that there was a crossroad for you, right? But I think so many people are always asking me, and I don't always quite know how to explain it in words, but the aha moment of like, how do you know this is what you wanted to do? Because everyone always thinks I have things figured out. And while externally it can appear that way, I think like it was just a lot of curiosity and going, oh, like this is something that could turn to this, and this is something I'm great at. I take feedback. I take like, observations. I mean, I listen to myself, editing all the time. So I notice when I'm doing well or if this is not right for me. Like, for example, I tried YouTube at one point in college. I'm like, yeah, I'm just not a vlogger, But then podcast came along. I'm like, oh, this is better for me. It's like a better format, right? What was that feeling like for you? Like that gut feeling of, this is something to move forward with versus like, maybe another thing you've had before where it's like, okay, I really enjoy this, but this isn't quite it to work with.
I think what that moment was for me was just realizing that everything around it was working seamlessly. Kind of the universe was conspiring to make it happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes you really need to listen to those signs and be very intuitive and listen. It's funny because I tell my mom this all the time. I'm like, I know the universe is trying to tell me something, but I don't like what it's trying to tell me. So I'll close my ears and look for the other signs.
Yeah.
And genuinely, if you sit in stillness, if you do what you love, and if you listen, you'll know. It's sorry to repeat the word, but it is intuitive.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
So just listen and be open-minded, probably.
Yeah. Quick side tangent on like intuition and like just knowing, but did you have that feeling when it came to relationships as well? And obviously knowing that your now husband at that time, and you were dating him since you were 23, right?
Yeah.
Ish. So like that's an earlier age, especially when you're in New York and like you dive into a relationship and then it ends up being like the long-term one. What was that process like for you? A lot of girls always ask me on the podcast, like, just the whole navigation of intuition with career, and then this is a toxic female friendship, and then like leaving them behind, and then also knowing he's the right guy to align with, and you know what I mean? But a lot of times I hear often a lot of founders and a lot of just guests on my show who are married have shared a lot of like these intuitions and these like knowings and on both their career and their relationship. And so I'm always fascinated by like how you see that theme and all domains of life.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And it's really important to work on yourself because your intuition will be so loud when you've done the work and you've shown up for yourself and you know who you really are, which takes time. It's not something, definitely, I didn't know who I was in my 20s, and maybe, I still don't know today, but I have a better idea because I take really good care of myself emotionally.
Yeah.
Which is why I think intuition is so clear.
Yeah.
When you're doing those things. But so I would say that when I was in my earlier 20s, I didn't always listen to my intuition, and that's a good and a bad thing because in one sense you learn by making mistakes, right? So whether that's through friendships or unsuccessful relationships, but it also leads you to finding the right people.
Yeah.
And I also think that there is this idea of the perfect relationship that is so dated. Yeah. Because what is it that they say? Love is about two imperfect people coming together and creating this perfect situation. Yeah. When that's not really true. Yeah. I really think that love is about two whole, complete, emotionally responsible people that come together, and together being those things individually can create a beautiful place for love to grow. Yeah. And the base of the relationship that you have should be based on friendship. Yeah. That should be the base. Yeah. And your intuition will always, I would hope, it would lead you to abundant friendships that can turn into romantic ones.
Yeah.
Hope that.
Yeah, no, I love that because, you know, I've always heard about the foundation of every romantic relationship should be friendship, should be based in friendship, you know? And I think that's something, I mean, we talked a little bit about like modern society yesterday and just how like a lot of things have, you know, evolved. But I think these small nuggets of wisdom are like evaporating in kind of these conversations, you know? It's a lot of these, you know, like game playing, like what was it yesterday? Be the golden retriever.
Be the golden retriever.
Yeah, or like the black cat or something.
Yes.
I don't know. There's always like these like different like furry animal analogies, and it's kind of like, well, what about like healthy security, or even the thing too, which is actually one of the things I loved about why I was curious about this book, because you mentioned something around, I don't know if it was within the book or something that you just learned in general, but about like being able to separate from your partner, right? And I've always been an advocate for that. I think as an entrepreneur and being very independent in my early 20s, and also having experienced what lack of independence or emotional independence looked like in a former college relationship, was like eye-opening. Like, okay, you must learn how to have healthy separation. But like, what did you learn from that, and whether it was that book or just in general about relationships, especially as you grew in your 20s, and why that's so important for women? Because, you know, I think every individual needs to have that balance, but I think a lot of women need to be encouraged by other women on why that ends up being so healthy. And I think you're a great example of that, because you are married, and of course like there's natural ups and downs and like normal conflicts in everyone's relationship, but it's like these learnings, like in my eyes, I always see like people who have these experiences that I don't experience yet. Like, I'm not married, like there's certain things I just don't know, right? And it's always like sharing that wisdom to the younger sister, or you know what I mean, like I lived a little more than you, I do know this much more. Yeah.
So it was the book, by the way, that talks about how important it is to separate, and it's not a negative thing. Yeah. It's really about, let's say you have a 20-something-year-old girl, a 23-year-old girl who's in a new relationship. Yeah. Of course, every weekend she's going to want to be with her partner and going out for dinner or traveling and spend 24 hours together. But the beauty of love, the beauty of a relationship is that you can go and spend 24 hours apart or travel and be gone for weeks at a time. And when you come back, that love, of course, is still there. Yes. And you shouldn't be afraid. And in the book, Centering in the Art of Intimacy, it talks about how there's this fear, right? That when you come back after a week or 3 days or even a night that you're not sharing dinner together, there's this fear that the love will be gone, or the love will be less, or the love will go to someone else who was there. Yeah. And that's just not true. Yeah. And, you know, that probably does come from experience and from maturing, being an emotionally mature person. Right. And you don't have to wait until you're in your 30s to be emotionally mature, which I didn't know that. I was very insecure. I still am. I think everybody is, and it's natural. Yes. But I think that when you're young, if you have access to people and to literature and maybe some married friends that have been around the block and know a little bit, it's a little bit less intimidating. And how cool is that? I always think, imagine being 23 today. Yeah. I mean, you're
I'm 27.
Yeah, you're 27.
Yeah.
But imagine being 23 or 22 and going into a relationship with self-respect, with a crazy level of self-respect and emotional maturity. That's really cool.
Really cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. And that's the funny part too, is like, I feel like that's been my quote unquote life hack over these years, is I'm always asking people who are not like parents' age, but like somewhere between 5-10 years older than me, been through, you know, the ringer a little bit more than me, and like know a thing or two. And I see like these common themes, right? Which is definitely one of them being around independence, you know, healthy emotional independence, which helps towards like self-security. And then later on, like self-respect, because sometimes like I've seen it so much in today's day and age too. It's like some people will stay in dynamics where they're not respected, or, you know, unfortunate things where, because they didn't come in with that understanding of self-respect and self-love and healthy boundaries, like they stay within these dynamics. And then for me, I think I was very lucky. I was tuning into like Tony Robbins when I was in college. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, I was
Huge.
super young. I was like 21, and that's when I learned a lot and that's actually why I started this podcast, because I realized a lot of our fulfillment comes from our relationships. And however, though, the health of the relationships, right? Because really bad ones will make you feel really shitty, even if you're going to a job you love, but you wake up and you're still in conflict with someone, like even if it's a girlfriend or a partner, it's gonna like bring you down. And and vice versa. Like if you're feeling like that those buckets are filled, you feel really excited, you're glowing differently. And so I learned that from a young age. And I think even though that learning curve was very early, I'm still always trying to pick up these different things of like, oh, like, these people have been together for X amount of years. They know a thing or two about like navigating the bumps along the way. And I think it's important for, especially my podcast, a lot of young women in their early mid-20s are listening to this. And so they're always navigating a little bit of everything. And that's why I like bring these topics up, because I think it's like the more you hear this repetitively, the more it kind of gets planted in your head, like a good reminder. And next time they're in a situation where they're like, oh, I need to be okay with separation from my partner for a weekend, or like small things like that, because like, oh, I heard these two girls talk about it on the podcast and one's married, so that must work. That must work.
I promise it does.
Yes. No,
absolutely.
How else did you create independence for yourself though, in like as a, we talked about this yesterday too, like as a woman, just like the inner work and outside of just, emotionally within relationships, but also just as a person, like in your career and in your interests and in health and also like your project?
So I'm going to give you a very unconventional answer.
Yeah, I love that.
I really think that therapy is huge.
Yeah.
And I think therapy is huge whether you are the happiest person on the planet or whether you are struggling big time. Because so many people look at therapy as, I'm going through a really hard time right now. I need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and I would say 90% of the time, therapy is important, because when you are in those brilliant moments of your life where everything is going well, you're going to have somebody saying, great, what's working for you? What are you doing right now? They're going to ask you questions and get you speaking.
Yeah.
So I think first and foremost, if you do have therapy available to you, and I know that there are companies right now that you can even do online therapy, I think that that's huge. Huge. Other than that, I would say really loving, this is so corny, but really loving yourself and loving yourself for all of the things. So whether maybe you're insecure because you think that maybe you didn't, have as huge of an education as somebody else that that you work with, or maybe you're feeling a little bit insecure in just because you're a woman in your early 20s and it's normal. And I think that nurturing yourself and reading and surrounding yourself with people who make you feel good, I think those are the things that you should be doing. So much of the time, well, I won't generalize, but I'll say it's really common to want to be the most interesting person in the room.
Oof.
Right?
Yes. And I feel like it's so like trendy on social media to like be the main character. Like this, like you're the main. we had good laughs about this yesterday. Yeah, and I loved it because I was like, someone gets it. I swear, like I'm not the only one that thinks this stuff is like really far fetched.
Exactly. No, you're right. And they say, be the most interesting person in the room, and you feel confident. I don't want to be the most interesting person in the room. If I'm the most interesting person in the room, I'm probably in the wrong room. I want to be with people that make me feel curious and that get me talking and asking questions. And so I think that's, if I was in my early 20s again, this is what I would want to hear, because this is what I hear now, and I wish that I did before.
What were some activities you later on like developed by yourself, like that you were doing that you noticed now had like the compound effect of being positive in your life? Whether that was, being like consistently going to the gym or going to certain workouts, or consistently, we talked about it in like relationship dynamics, like making time to go out with friends, even if you live with your partner, or even if you've been with your partner for many years and you're in a routine where you always like spend every weekend together. It's like learning how to still carve out time with other people and have your own independent life. Like what were some of those actions you took to continue to like be Adriana?
So I will say, because no one is perfect, especially in the beginning of my relationship, I did have a hard time balancing my friendships and my personal activities that I love to do.
Yeah.
Because I was in a new relationship with somebody who was a very curious person by nature and was always doing very interesting things, very different than what I was doing at the time, especially because he is Italian. And so even just the cultural background there, maybe it sounds silly, but there is a difference in any case in the way that, he grew up versus the way that I grew up.
Yes. Yes.
And so it was really interesting, especially coming from previous relationships that I had, whether it's also, by the way, friendships or romantic ones,
Right.
to have somebody saying, are you going to hang out with your friends? Are you going to go see your girlfriends? Were you guys going to have a girls' night?
Yeah.
Because, it was
so healthy too.
It was very healthy.
Yeah.
It was really, really healthy. And I think that in any case, that's a very important part of it. In terms of how I think that it took me a bit. It took me a bit to kind of get back to myself. I think I call this the Brad Pitt effect because Brad Pitt adapts to his girlfriend's hairstyles.
I didn't know that.
You
so
have
funny.
there's this
No
hilarious
way.
meme. I'll show it to you
Wow.
after. And so I think that a lot of women adapt to or I won't generalize. A lot of people adapt to their partners'
Yes.
lifestyles.
Yes.
So whether it's their friend group or their activities and what they like to do.
Yeah.
So there was a learning curve where I was doing that. But then at the end of the day, there are still things that I love to do with my girlfriends. Like maybe we'll go to a ceramics class.
Yeah.
Or we'll go to a workout together.
Yeah.
Or even, I'm an only child, so I love doing things by myself personally. I'm very grateful for that because there are people that have a hard time being alone.
Right.
And I love being alone.
Yeah.
Whether it's something silly and, just going for a walk by myself. I'm a big proponent, and I will say this, and this changed my life. I romanticize everything about life.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
So whether it's in the morning and you're playing some bossa nova, some music at home, and you have, candles, and maybe you light some sage or you light whatever it is, sage. Doing those things,
Yes.
taking care of yourself because that's what it is.
Yes.
I think that's something you should never stop doing. Always. Again, relationship with yourself is the most important one.
Yeah.
I can't show up for my marriage, for my job, or for my friends, or for my family if I'm not taken care of. Period.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to keep taking care of yourself.
Yeah. Did it take you some time to draw that boundary with, like, for example, I think a lot of people struggle with getting invited to, go out and do this and go and do this thing with the social circle, right? And then you realize at some point, like, I need to create space for myself to have that individual time to fill, in my case, it's like fill Emily's bucket, right? How, like, what did that look like for you? Because I'm always fascinated to hear, like, everyone's, like, journey towards, like, all right, this is where I create space for me. This is how I balance my week with me time, partner time, girlfriend time, whatever time, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes people just end up doing, like, saying yes to everything. And then, like, 2 years later, they're like, where did I go? Right? You know what I mean? It's like, who am I again? You know what I mean? Because, like, you just forget, like, your sense of self.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Wow, filling your own bucket.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on the kind of person you are. I would assume that you're extroverted because you are, I don't know, just the way you are. You're warm and you make people feel comfortable and get people speaking.
Yeah.
But there are introverted extroverts.
Yes.
Which is what I think I am.
Yeah.
Which is I can be in this situation, but then I need an hour to myself or a night to myself. And I think it's really listening to that. FOMO is not easy, especially when you're young and all of your friends are going out and you're sitting there debating, like, should I go out tonight?
Yes. Yes.
So it's picking and choosing. I think that the most important thing is to make sure that if you're going out that night or that afternoon, you want to feel great. So do whatever you need to do to feel good when you do go out, whether that's staying home and recovering or dedicating time to work. Yeah. Some people feel so invigorated. They spend the whole day working and then they have, the end of their day and they're ready to go and they're pumped because they just put all of that energy into something. And so it's finding out what your I guess, what your gas is, like how you recover.
Yeah.
What fuel you need for your tank.
Yeah. Do you feel like all of that inner work and that personal development enabled you to feel confident? For example, we talked actually a little bit about, the gutsiness of just going for that storefront in Paris, right? For your fashion brand, and like doing things where people are often going to be like, how did that happen, right? And everyone thinks it's like an overnight success, and it's like not, right?
Yes.
But like those, just, the gutsiness of like figuring it out and being like, yeah, like we can do that, like, do you feel like just having that sense of self helped contribute to the confidence of doing these things that people would naturally think are like gutsy, and like, where did that come from, you know? Yeah.
Yes. I also think fake it till you make it is so true, in the sense of, even if you have imposter syndrome and if you feel that you can't, pretend you can. Just pretend you can. Pretend you can do it. Pretend you can make the scary phone call.
Yeah.
Or, you're going to meet somebody maybe that's in your industry who's really intimidating. Meet them with your shoulders back and shake their hand really tight and just pretend that you own it.
Yeah.
Because that will translate.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, anything in business especially can be really intimidating. And especially if you're talking about consumer packaged goods, like what you have and your business in general. If you just fight the fear, or what is it, feel the fear and do it anyway, that's the secret.
Yeah.
You just have to do it, because the worst thing that can happen is that it doesn't work out. Maybe it fails.
Yeah.
But then what? You're going to live in that feeling forever?
Yeah.
No, you're going to pick yourself back up and you're going to try again. And so I think that's the secret.
Yeah. Are you taking that mindset and approaching that with your wellness cafe as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. I think it really helped that my partner, my life partner, is very courageous in business, and he's kind of been, I learned so much from him over the past few years. And he's also the person who's pushing me. And every day that, maybe I had a really hard day and I don't even want to think about the wellness part of the business. He's like, did you do this? Did you do this? And having that is really beautiful.
Yeah.
I think I feel very lucky to have that. But I am taking that mentality with the specialty. We were thinking yesterday what to call this, like the specialty store.
Yes, specialty store, specialty cafe.
Specialty cafe. And I am taking it with that. I think that now I'm going into it with a few years of experience under my belt of projects that did really well, maybe projects that are on pause, maybe projects that didn't, go one way and went the other.
Yeah.
And so what is really cool is that I'm taking my learnings, even from my current companies, and applying it to this place with fear. Yeah. But when you meet me, no fear, right?
Yeah.
Because it's behind the scenes a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love that you share that rawness, right? Because so many people, like we talked about, when it comes to entrepreneurship, everyone wants to be one. Or they think it's easier said than done. They don't understand, half the time you are funding the whole thing yourself. Half the time you're trying to find investors, again, depending on the type of business. And so I think it's important for people to hear like the different elements that each person is actually navigating, like in life. And I think that's why this is like called What Fulfills You, because I see that there are so many different buckets in life that we are managing. In the same, just on a day-to-day basis, right? And that is the reality. It's not that, okay, you have successful business and then it's like, okay, what's the behind the scenes in the relationship, right? And I think it's like also vice versa. Like a lot of people are only sharing kind of one highlight of the life, and I've always been curious about, okay, if they're doing so well here, is there anything that they're like navigating, or is there anything that's harder for them to work through?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's always a dance. Nothing is perfect. Yeah. Everything is trial and error. Everything is, in real time. Yeah. And I think that relationships are not perfect. Businesses are not perfect. Being an entrepreneur is definitely not perfect. Yeah. And it's just about your bounce back rate and being graceful in the process. Because how easy is it to be frustrated, to throw in the towel and to, you know, I give up. I can't, whether it's a relationship or business or yourself. And how quickly you can come back from that and realign and say, okay, today was really hard, but tomorrow will be better. And then, you know what? Go to sleep early, have dinner, take a great shower, an everything shower, go to bed early and wake up and start again. That's the beautiful thing, because you always have the next day. So that's what I would say about that.
I feel like you've mentioned that your partner has also had great influence and alignment in kind of like both of your lifestyles. What's your reflection on that, and like how relevant that is in a healthy relationship long term where you two align on certain things? You know what I mean? Because like I can imagine maybe one's more of a risk taker and one's completely, you know, adverse to that, right? And that can cause friction like 10 years down the line, right? You know what I mean? So I think small intricacies, like I love observing that with people who, you know, are together long term and have been together for long term, because I think like you start to see that, okay, this is great that we have these qualities, because without that, that might make the dynamic different and harder to be together. Like, have you seen anything that plays well in that regard?
Yes, I think that, you know, we live together, we work together, we work out together. So we do a lot together. And I think that, again, it's important to keep your sense of independence as a person in the relationship, which I have and which he has. And that also translates to independence in business, meaning we disagree all the time. And it's about those disagreements and me working to understand his perspective and him working to understand my perspective. And then using those two perspectives to make a decision that's going to benefit us both as business owners. I think that he does a great job at turning off. And I'm still working on that. And it's, I would say at the end of the day, the most important element of a relationship, and this also refers to business relationships, since we are business partners in that sense, is having similar or the same values.
Okay, that's huge.
That's huge. Having similar values is everything. Or I would say even the same, because you know that even though your thought processes may be different, the goal is the same one. And if that's all you have, if that's all you have to start with, run with it. Because that means at the end of the day, regardless if you're so different or not, you're going to always be working towards the same goal.
Right. Oh, that's so valuable. And I was actually like just about to ask you that too. Like, how important do you find aligned values in a marriage and long-term relationship?
Everything. Everything. From a marriage to female friendships.
Friendships for sure.
Friendships, everything. And, you know, if you choose somebody as your life partner, then I think your values really should be very similar and reflective of each other and what you want in the future. Friendship is a little bit more difficult because sometimes you love a person so much and you're polar opposites. And you may have separate values, but there's just that kinship that ties you together. And so friendships are interesting.
And I do always wonder, like, long term, how well friendships or any kind of relationship dynamic can go if the friction ends up always being values, you know, because then you end up making different decisions. I feel like I learned from a young age that if people share the same values, then they will often make decisions from that place when push comes to shove. Right? And so if you're with a partner or with a girlfriend that you need to rely on and you operate from the same systems and values, it's easier to trust that person's judgment and et cetera, and like less friction will go on, you know?
Absolutely. And on that note, when I met my husband, I met him with a slew of friends that he had from, you know, from years and years and years. And that shows so much integrity about a person. Lengthy friendships. And look, it's not, I disagree with the red flag, green flag, beige flag. I don't think you need any flags. And I think that, you know, You don't, just because you don't have a friendship from when you were in preschool doesn't lessen your value as a person. But definitely meeting somebody and hearing stories about when they were 17 or 15 or 30 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yes.
It's really great. And it teaches you also how to be a friend, which, by the way,
Yes.
I was not always the best friend. And luckily I married someone who values his friendships
So awesome.
as family.
Yeah.
And so I learned friendship from this person. And now I have great friendships that I care about deeply, but it took me a long time. I'm 30.
Yeah.
And it took me until today to really give value to how important friendship is for you as a person.
Yeah. You know, a comment I'll never forget that he said when we met in Milan was about, because I think he's lived in many different places around the world, and he has like connections in different places, and he can always, like, the citizen of the world mentality, right? And how he can like reach out to people in like Canada, or if he's in Canada or like somewhere in France, like there's always a friend there. And I remember, like, I was like so young and curious. I was like 24 at the time, just like, oh, that's so good to know. And I'm like, I love having friends in different like countries too. Like, forget cities, like countries. Yeah,
You would love this. When he first moved to New York, so I'll butcher this story probably, but when he first moved here, he came in, like, didn't speak the perfect English. Now, I mean, he speaks better English than me, but didn't speak perfect English. I know he knew people, but he didn't have the friendships that he had in Italy here. So he really came here fresh.
Wow.
20, or I think 26. I don't remember exactly now, maybe even younger. And he would have these dinner parties, which now we do at our house.
Cool.
But these dinner parties were great because he would tell, and this is true, people that have gone have confirmed with me. He would invite X amount of people, and to that person would say, you need to bring somebody who I've never met before and who these people have never met before.
Oh.
And that's who you can bring. So it would be a dinner that he would cook, or most likely he was cooking. And there would be a bunch of people meeting for the first time. And today, these people are best friends.
Wow.
It's really cool. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a concept that I would say, if you are in your early 20s, do that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That is impressive, because for me, I've always fundamentally believed that what fulfills each person is ultimately the health of our relationships.
Yes.
Right? You know, it's like you can have a job that you love, or whatever, career, anything that you love, and you wake up, but if you're in conflict or in a really bad zone with a girlfriend or a business partner or even your life partner, right? You don't feel as good going to work, or you don't feel as good even going to the gym, because you're like mad because like it's still in a bad, you know, vibe, right?
Yes.
And so it's like the strength and health of our relationships, to me, has always been so vital. And I remember like just hearing these small comments along the years of like, oh, you know, just being able to have friends in this country and being able to have these connections and keep them over the years. I was like, like that is, once again,
mental note.
Yeah, mental note, like good theme to have. But I guess to kind of like wrap things up, what is one or two piece of advice you have for a young girl in her mid-20s right now? Let's say she lives in New York and she's listening and she's just, you know, curious about life, but something maybe you would even tell your younger self that maybe you wish you heard back then. It could be in any part of life. What would that be?
The one really important piece of advice that I wish that I would have received is, and maybe it sounds selfish, but take really good care of yourself. Really take care of yourself. Treat yourself with respect. Talk to yourself in a way that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
Even if you don't really mean it. And I know out of all the things we spoke about, maybe it doesn't make sense now, but I truly think even those relationships, like what you said just now about, you know, you're in an argument with somebody, and so even your workout's not that great, or you go into work and your head's cloudy and you're thinking about and replaying the situation. If you take good care of yourself and if you respect yourself, you're going to show up in relationships differently and you're going to value those relationships in a really different way. And you know what? If you're probably not even going to want to have that tension and just say, did I hurt? I'm sorry if I did something to disrespect you. You know what? Why don't we grab a coffee? Let's move on.
Yeah.
And it's that bounce back rate.
Yeah.
So all of it is connected to yourself.
Yeah.
If you want to make yourself the most interesting person in the room or travel to an interesting place, surround yourself with compelling people, do the work yourself, focus on you, because the most authentic version of you will naturally attract all of that already belongs to you. So just focus on that.
Yeah.
I would say.
I love that. That's a mic drop. That's such a mic drop. Okay, well, last question, something I ask every guest on the show. Yes. But in reflection of everything in your life and in your journey and your relationships, what would you say ultimately fulfills you in life?
Wasn't expecting that. I want to say I'm leaning with the word experience, meaning to experience something, a place, people, relationships. Experience for me really, really fulfills me and brings me happiness. And it makes me feel content. It betters my relationship and my relationships.
Yeah.
Experiencing people, experiencing this.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave here today very fulfilled.
Yeah.
Truly, because having these conversations and spending time together over, whether it's over a cup of coffee or around a microphone, I think it's what's going to fill your cup and feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. This was so insightful. I always think back to when I was in my early 20s and just like the conversations amongst women I wish I heard. And like this is literally why I cultivate stuff like this and like why I thought of you, because I just like it still like lingers with me. Like Milan 2 years ago, I'm just thinking like how fun and just on like spontaneous that evening was, and I was just there like visiting. I really like knew no one and just like was able to meet you guys, and it just like to me like those moments like I think about and I'm like, oh, like this is what I know other women are kind of yearning for, like to like learn from other people, to learn different nuggets, different wisdoms, different life lessons, and people only just a couple years ahead, because then it's like later on, it's like a domino effect is kind of how I see life, you know, like you can help plant that seed for the next generation or for someone a couple years younger than you, for them to do the same. And, you know, hopefully the world, like it kind of continues to spread energetically. So
I love that you're leading that, by the way.
Thank you.
These kinds of conversations are so beautiful, and the fact that you're doing it is awesome. I wish that I had this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Where can everyone find you in case they're curious about your social media or anything you want to share?
So
anything that you're working on, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing.
I was thinking about this earlier. I said, I have 5 different handles. I don't know which one.
Whichever is your priority to share or you want to get out there for people to learn more about.
I can write it down for you too, and then I can read them off now.
Okay.
So my personal Instagram is Adriana Naslausky, at Adriana Naslausky. Then my husband and I have a brand. It's Le Diplomate, so it's at Atelier Le Diplomate, at Le Diplomate Official.
Yeah.
Then I have at Rinascimento by Adriana, which is my health coaching platform.
I had no idea. That's so cool. Okay, we have to share that.
I'll share that.
Yeah.
And then my last one is at Chez Cozy, which is going to be the specialty
so cool
place.
Oh my God. I love the way you say this. It's like so elegant. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thank you.
So good. Thank you.